In the Old West, life demanded quick decisions. Far from the Puritan East, laws and customs changed from town to town. Traveling judges, saloons, and ranches shaped looser rules. While Boston and New York demanded order, open frontiers rewarded those who could fend for themselves and pay the price. Morality followed the trail of gold, cattle, and the railroad. In 1916, at the Riding Stampede show in New York, Norwegian-American Tilly Baldwin entered the arena alongside professional cowhands. It was a step into a space still closed to women in early 20th century rodeos, and showed how the cowboy, born from the labor of the West, was becoming entertainment for urban audiences in America's big cities. Around 1905, Lottie Key Yated, daughter of a Laguna Pueblo chief, posed for a photograph. The Kawaiic attire with beaded belt and necklaces signals the ceremonial role. The scene takes place in the semi-arid west-central region of New Mexico, on the outskirts of Albuquerque, as the railroads were beginning to connect regions, goods, and ways of life. Tom Tobin, an Irish-American, made his name in the West as a mountain man. He lived by tracking trails, hunting, and guiding caravans, and served as a scout for the U.S. Army. In 1863, when Colorado was in panic, he tracked down Felipe Espinosa and his nephew, captured them, and ended the string of attacks, becoming a legend among pioneers and soldiers. At the end of the Civil War, a cowboy from the West holds a Henry .44, a lever-action rifle released in 1860. The weapon brought rapid fire with a 15-round tubular magazine and became a symbol of an accelerating era. Even so, in the vast bison hunts, it was rarely seen. Its weight, range, and cost limited its role far from the towns. In 1908, a photo attributed to Roland Reed records an Ojibwa woman. At the turn of the century, her people inhabited the Great Lakes region, moving with the rhythm of the seasons, fishing, gathering, and crafts in birch bark and beadwork. The image suggests continuity of knowledge and, at the same time, an encounter with photographic modernity. Subscribe and tell us where you're joining us from. In the Old West, folks drank beer without chilling it, a habit that clashed with the European custom of serving it cold. Until 1873, what reached the saloons came from local brews or small nearby factories. It was the flavor of the place, simple, short in transport, and shaped by heat, dust, and the haste of those living on the frontier. Vera McGinnis, alongside two cowgirls, shows how, since the late 19th century, something left the Texas ranches and entered the rodeo arenas in New York. Across the country, in working corrals and parades, Western attire became a practical uniform and a symbol of identity for men and women in livestock work, both on the job and at celebrations, as well as in equestrian shows. In 1900, Carl Wernz photographs in Arizona, two young Hopi by a window. The hair whirls signal youth and roles in the community. At the turn of the century, the villages atop the mesas of the Colorado Plateau received artists, traders, and travelers. Their gazes already follow this approaching world, bringing promises and tensions. At the turn of the Great Plains, Red Cloud, the Oglala Lakota leader, appears with the ceremonial headdress that affirms his people's alliances, memory, and faith. Beside him, American Horse wears a coat and a gun belt, signs of a world closing in from all sides. Between the two, one sees the harsh negotiation between tradition and change, and the future demanded an answer. In 1912, at Crater Lake National Park, Oregon, rangers organized one of the first rowboat crossings. The small team crossed the deep blue water, took measurements near Wizard Island, and compared old reports. It was science done the hard way. To understand a caldera opened by the eruption of Mount Mazama about 7,700 years ago and its traces. In 1878, a photograph at Fort Keogh in the Montana Territory shows a Cheyenne woman. The military post, erected after Little Bighorn under Nelson Miles's campaign, consolidated the army on the plains. In that environment, the Cheyenne, an Algonquian-speaking people and allies of the Lakota and Arapaho, experienced displacement and struggled to preserve their rights and memory. In the Old West, securing water was only the beginning. Food came from what the land offered: hunting, fishing, and gathering. Pioneers hunted in groups, rationed gunpowder, and made use of hides, fat, and bones. During drought, they followed bison. A mistake could cost them the winter. Smoking, salting, and trading leftovers in small towns completed the cycle. That sustained families and built settlements. In the early 20th century, in the Hopi villages of the Arizona Plateau, basket weaving was part of daily life. Artisans gathered yucca, cured fibers, dyed them with minerals, and wove spirals that marked clans. They served rituals, trade, and the storage of corn. Even under missionaries and federal agents, the craft followed sacred rules and was passed down through generations. In the image, Carlotta Chiwiwi appears with her daughters, Maria and Felicita Tura, members of Isleta Pueblo. The record from the early 20th century and attributed to Poli is set in the U.S. Southwest, when New Mexico was moving from territory to statehood in 1912. The composition reinforces kinship ties and the centrality of women in Taiwa life. By the end of the 19th century, the American West blended promise and conflict. Cowboys drove herds to the railroads, enduring hard work and constant risk, linking pastures to distant markets. As fences and cities expanded, businesses grew and cultures clashed, transforming the region and fueling an increasingly global economy. Stephanie Hagenbarth carried out the routine of cattle ranching on a property that crosses the line between Idaho and Montana. She checked fences, branded calves, and negotiated sales. The family has kept this land since the 1880s, preserving management methods passed from parents to children. There, frontier and tradition shaped every decision on the range. At First Mesa, Arizona, Frederick Monson recorded in the first decades of the 20th century, young Hopi from Sikomovi. The girls wear ritual attire tied to the rhythm of harvests and village festivals. Amid a Southwest in transformation, the photograph reveals practices that hold firm and weave cultural continuity. Between past and future, the portrait brings us closer. Since the earliest records, people have sought cures in bottles. In the Old West, patent tonics spread through wagons and fairs, sold as protection against fevers, bad luck, and all kinds of pain. Travelers, charlatans, and a few doctors crossed towns and villages. And only later did laws and newspapers start demanding proof of what was inside them. At the end of the 19th century, Indian Territory became a focus of conflict. Marshals Heck Thomas, Bill Tillman, and Chris Madsen operated there with the full force of the law. After 5 years on the run, accused of killing Deputy Daniel Maples, the Cherokee Ned Christie was surrounded in November 1892. The standoff ended his life and marked the tensions of the time. A scene from 1895 portrays a young woman of Taos Pueblo, in present-day New Mexico. Among adobe walls, marks of daily labor dialogue with the memory of the place, inhabited for centuries by Taiwa speakers. On the upper Rio Grande, the Pueblo was a crossroads of exchange before colonization. The multi-story dwellings reveal the communal logic of its architecture. Before becoming American territory, the West already suffered from a lack of water. Short rivers, irregular rains, and uncertain wells shaped routes and conflicts. At the same time, digging canals, dividing creeks, and scheduling turns of use built bonds. Neighbors became partners in keeping life flowing. From that came local rules on who drew water and when. In 1928, in the open valleys of Wyoming, Cavalry Lieutenant Jack Colleton, Tim McCoy, takes on a thorny mission. With a minimal garrison, enforce federal law and prevent disputes over routes and resources from exploding among settlers, traders, and indigenous peoples. The balance is fragile, and a single mistake could ignite the region, drawing crossed vendettas. In 1892, the photograph records a young Kiowa in an everyday scene, integrated with her people. The garments, made with beads and textiles already common in that period, signal exchanges with settlers and the plains trade networks. The attentive gaze and the adornments suggest the responsibilities of youth and rights that sustained Kiowa life at the end of the 19th century. In the mid-19th century, the discovery of gold in California sparked a mass migration. Miners, merchants, and adventurers crowded towns and roads. Between shifts in riverbeds, the poker table became a meeting place. Cards and bets drove business and destiny. In saloons, victories decided routes and debts. In 1849, during a topographic expedition through the arid south of what was then the New Mexico Territory, Engineer Lieutenant Emil Weeks Whipple found, by the Gila River Trail, a disoriented Yuma teenage girl. He noted that after days without food or water, she was barely breathing. He gave aid and took her to the Yuma settlement, returning her to her family's leaders. A Woman of the Spokane Nation, recorded in 1897 by Frank LaRoche, faces the camera. The clothing and adornments point to practices of the Columbia Plateau. The scene belongs to a time of turning in the Pacific Northwest. Railroads were advancing and new economies taking hold, while collective life preserved rituals, beadwork, and basketry. James Deacon Miller wore a suit, went to church, and spoke softly. In Texas and the Oklahoma Territory, he earned a reputation as a decent neighbor. Behind that image, he closed death contracts and vanished into the night. When the reckoning came, few connected the banker to the hired gun. He only fell in 1909 when he was caught after a deal and the town struck back. In 1915, with tourism growing in the West, Mariposa Grove was already part of Yosemite National Park. The grove held the most visited cluster of giant sequoias. Naturalists and travelers came to measure, record, and debate conservation, while guides explained why protecting these trees mattered to the country, and the flow of visitors kept rising. In 1904, in present-day New Mexico, a photograph records the Corn Maiden, a mythical figure of the Pueblo peoples. At the turn of the 20th century, the scene reveals corn as the axis of daily life, sustenance at the table, ruler of the agricultural calendar, and offering in rituals. By bringing myth, labor, and community together, the image shows how the Southwest wove meaning around this grain. In 1848, at Sutter's Mill, the news of gold spread across the country. Trails filled up, ships departed, and towns sprang up overnight. Commerce grew, makeshift laws appeared, and clashes with native peoples followed. Few got rich, many stayed behind. The rush redrew the map of the West and hastened California's entry into the Union in 1850. In 1906, the Arizona Club enlivened a Las Vegas that was still just a railroad outpost in the desert. There were gambling tables, a drink counter, and rooms for railway workers, miners, and travelers from the San Pedro, Los Angeles, and Salt Lake Railroad. With fewer than 5,000 residents, the town made the club its meeting point, business hub, and a sure subject in the local press. In 1900, Carl Everton Moon traveled through indigenous territories in the United States to record, with the camera, a world in transformation. His project documented daily practices, rituals, landscapes, and elders' accounts, seeking to keep memory at the turn of the 20th century, when Western expansion and new frontiers were redrawing these communities' lives. In the Old West, the barber cut hair, yes, but also stitched wounds, pulled teeth, and mixed medicines behind the counter. It came from a time when doctors were rare and medical school was a luxury. The town trusted him because he was there when pain struck and blood ran. Between scissors and basins, he became a surgeon out of necessity. In 1911, at the second Pendleton Roundup in Pendleton, Oregon, women's presence in rodeo was marked. Minutes before the start, the horsewomen lined up on horseback, wearing hats and riding skirts, and saluted the grandstand. The gesture said it all. They would enter every event in earnest, ready to test strength and skill against any competitor. In the 1880s, in the territory of New Mexico, a woman of the Taos Pueblo people faces the camera. The record shows dark wool on the body, a mantle thrown over the shoulders, turquoise necklaces, and a hairstyle proper to tradition. In the background, the adobe houses point to communal life. On the face, the everyday guided by rituals, exchanges, and the rhythm of the harvests. In the 19th century American West, cowboys crossed plains for months and ate what fit in the saddle. The menu was short and built to last. Pots of beans, chunks of salted meat, hardtack bread, dried fruit, and lots of coffee. It wasn't luxury. It was fuel to drive cattle, keep watch at night, and face dust storms. In 1940, at age 14, Casey Tibbs left his family ranch in South Dakota and hit the road chasing the professional rodeo circuit. He rode like few others and in 1949 became world champion. and appeared on the cover of Life magazine. When the competition days ended, he spent about 20 years in Hollywood, acting, doing stunt work, and coordinating rodeo scenes in films. In the 1880s, Marcia Pascal, of Cherokee descent and daughter of U.S. Army officer George Pascal, travels a country in transformation. In the wake of the Civil War, the march westward, the railroads, and the redefinition of laws reshaped the Indian Territory and mixed communities, shaping her choices and the reach of her voice. Branding cattle began in Egypt around 2700 BC, when owners marked symbols to prove possession. It passed through medieval Europe with roaming herds and local laws. Centuries later, it crossed the Atlantic. It reached the American Southwest with Spanish vaqueros, and later became common practice among Mexican cowboys and Anglo ranches. On December 1, 1886, at the Bellevue Station in Texas, Jim and his brother Rube Burrow stopped the night train, disarmed the crew, and took only a few $100s. The small heist sparked something bigger. From then on, a series of robberies would send sheriffs, Pinkerton detectives, and armed posses chasing the pair across the countryside for months. In 1894, a Kiowa woman lives in the former Indian Territory, today Oklahoma. After the Plains Wars and the creation of borders, her people were undergoing changes that affected the economy and the sacred. Ceremonies hesitated, the language contracted, family roles shifted. What once rested on regional alliances now had to seek a new balance. With the discovery at Sutter's Mill in 1848, the California gold rush crowded trails and ports. People from everywhere chased fortune and a future, and letters became lifelines. To keep up, the Postal Service opened offices, created routes by stagecoach and steamboat, shortened delivery times, and introduced standard postage. Without it, business and families would have stayed in the dark. In Wyoming, one scene works as a short lesson. Tim McCoy explains, without embellishment, how the westward march shaped trails, forts, and conflicts. He lays out the Army's role on the frontier at the end of the 19th century and describes the customs of indigenous nations, connecting maps, dates, and politics into a direct portrait of that time. United States, 1900. A young indigenous woman appears in ceremonial attire of her nation. On the threshold of the 20th century, Native peoples face losses of territory and changes in autonomy. In this setting, dress speaks loudly. Each garment and adornment reaffirms belonging and continuity, a gesture of resistance that crosses time and confronts modernization. In the Old West, the day began early and ended in the dark. Settlers kept life going with what they had, fixing fences, fetching water, tending livestock, and trading supplies at the post. Children joined the rhythm early, around 4 or 5 years old, sweeping, feeding animals, and helping with harvests, because every pair of hands counted. The record of the Wyoming cowboy vanished from the archives, but authorship was attributed to Charles D. Kirkland of Cheyenne, then a railroad hotspot. From the negative analysis, the scene was taken between 1877 and 1895, a period when the Old West was already changing pace and the cowboy posed between myth and real life in a territory growing fast. In 1899, the photographer Frank Reinhardt recorded Hattie Tom, an Apache woman. The image appears at the end of the 19th century, when the American West was reorganizing and Native peoples were negotiating new civil powers. In the framing, adornments, and posture, one sees a conscious gesture to assert one's own origin and choose how to appear to the world amid tensions and continuities. In the final years of the 19th century, buffalo hunting became big business in the West. Leavenworth, Kansas grew as a hub for buying and shipping hides. Hunters arrived in convoys, sold their loads to middlemen, and from there the goods went to tanneries and factories. The circulating money paid for freight, inns, and shops driving the local economy. December 3, 1880. W.S. Kugler, co-owner of the Las Vegas Gazette, publishes a long article about the year that changed the Pecos River Valley and the panhandle of the New Mexico Territory. A rise in cattle theft, stagecoach robbery, and homicide. He lists those involved and says that all obey Billy the Kid, seen as a leader capable of moving any gang. Elsie Vance Chestuin, of the Chiricahua branch, enters the Apache history of the Southwest at the end of the 19th century. Amid campaigns and forced marches, the clans maintained kinship ties, alliances, and paths of subsistence. Her name summons memories of imprisonments, removals, and tense coexistence with army posts on the Mexico-United States border. Clay Allison earned fame in the Old West for acting fast and aiming true. He didn't see himself as just a gunfighter. He claimed to be a real shooter, trained to hit on the first try. In duels, patrols, or saloon brawls, his six-shooter set the pace. His legend grew less from boasting and more from how many people feared crossing his path. In 1906, at the Turkey Track Ranch in Texas, a group of cowboys and onlookers gathered to play Mumblety Peg, a campsite pastime in the Southwest. The challenge required a steady hand and attention to the pocket knife, with clear rules and point scoring turn by turn. Those who missed lost ground. Those who mastered it became stories retold by the campfire for years. In 1886, Lizzie Longwolf appears in the arena of Buffalo Bill's show. The Wild West tours where she performs helped fix in the imagination the idea of the frontier. On stage, rides, trick shooting, and choreographed numbers combined to transform scattered episodes into a narrative of the West, ready to sell. In 1680, the Pueblo Revolt in New Mexico united villages to expel the Spanish. By capturing thousands of horses, they opened the way for the animal to spread across the Great Plains. With it, indigenous peoples transformed travel, hunting, and warfare, creating trade networks and a power the Spanish hadn't expected. That turning point shaped the century. In the second half of the 19th century, Henry Miller and Charles Lux went from being butchers to building, in 1858, an empire in the San Joaquin Valley. The Miller and Lux Ranch became an integrated operation: cattle, farming, and slaughter. With about 1.3 million acres across CA, Oregon, and NV, they connected canals and railways to supply cities in series across the United States. In 1895, a photograph records a young Hopi, a Pueblo people of the mesas of Arizona. Her clothing and adornments reveal family and stage of life. While the end of the 19th century brought railroads, merchants, and researchers, the community's calendar remained paced by seasonal ceremonies that sustained bonds and meanings in collective daily life. On the march westward, caravans and cattle drives stopped at dawn to boil black water in cans. Coffee became a work tool. It woke sentinels, warmed hands, marked guard shifts, and mount changes. Without it, the trails, cold, and dust felt heavier. With it, the column moved on. From ranch to camp, it was the pause that brought the crew together. At the turn of the 19th century, rifles came with barrels ranging from 28 to 32 inches. Records from Oregon in 1880 show guards of the Astoria Express Company with that standard. Cutting the barrel helped in hallways and train cars, but the longer barrel offered a steadier aim, better range, and slightly less recoil when firing. In the end, mobility versus precision decided the job. In 1899, Frank Reinhardt records Hattie Tom, a Chiricahua Apache woman. In the ethnographic climate of the century's end, the image invites us to notice adornments, hairstyle, and textiles that reveal the group's techniques and identities. The serenity of the portrait echoes memories of displacement and alliances sealed after the Apache Wars, between memory and survival. Roy Bean was born around 1825 in Mason County, Kentucky. At 15, he left home to follow two brothers and hit the road west. He became a wanderer, changing course as jobs and risks appeared. That rootless youth forged the man who would later gain fame on the edges of the law. In 1888, in Pueblo, Colorado, two neighbors show how they hunted. One wields a Winchester 1886 lever action, the other a double-barreled shotgun with external hammers. In the West, 10 and 12 gauge cartridges dominated for impact. 16 and 20 gauge were for lighter work, ideal for fast birds and targets that called for a precise hand. In 1886, the photograph portrays Isabel Perico Njadi, a Chiricahua Apache woman held as a prisoner of war. The frame signals the end of the campaigns in the U.S. Southwest. After Geronimo's surrender, the capture of Apache groups intensified. Her presence reveals the impacts of military advance and occupation on indigenous peoples. The art of cattle roping took shape in the West with the arrival of Spanish settlers in the 18th century. Along came Mexican cowhands, the vaqueros, skilled in livestock handling. Along Texas routes, they trained cowboys and defined branding, sorting, and the way of driving herds across long distances. Donaldina Cameron, born in New Zealand, arrived young in San Francisco and began working at the Presbyterian Mission for Chinese girls. From 1895 until her retirement 47 years later, she led a home on Sacramento Street, and with legal backing and raids, fought gangs that brought girls from Canton into servitude and prostitution on the West Coast. Around 1900, the photograph records Alice, possibly linked to the Cayuse, Walla Walla, or Umatilla, peoples of the Columbia Plateau. Her features, clothing, and adornments indicate cultural belonging. The context of the time brought treaties, forced displacements, and new borders in the Pacific Northwest, shaping destinies and memories that the image still evokes. Over time, the Old West became a central piece of U.S. culture. Books and films shaped a shared memory. Cowboys, railroads, gold rushes, and land fights, while indigenous lives and the work of women, black people, and Latinos nearly vanished. Between myth and history, that past still defines courage and frontier. In Caldwell, Kansas, an unnamed cowboy embodies the rhythm of the Chisholm Trail. Hat pulled low, revolver in holster, and rifle in hand, he prepares to drive the herd toward the rail lines. It was the time when cattle crowded the railroad towns, stirring money, chaos, and stories. And every stop could change a destiny. In 1885, the photograph portrays a young Comanche woman. The hairstyle, beads, and fabric reveal artisanal knowledge and commercial exchanges in the southern Great Plains. It is a time after the collapse of the bison and the imposition of fixed territories, changes that redirected movements, dress, and forms of sustenance for the people. The scene condenses a historical turning point. Anna Emmeline McDoulet, known as Cattle Annie, became famous in the Oklahoma Territory alongside Jenny Stevens, or Little Britches. Teenagers, they followed gangs, carried messages, helped in escapes, and joined ever bolder robberies. With the law on their trail and partners falling, one question remained: how far would they go? In 1879, at the height of the Silver Rush in Leadville, the Tabor Opera House was born. 3 stories, brick walls about 16 inches thick. Politicians, artists, and miners all passed through there. The building survived more than a century of Rocky Mountain winters and still tells how the town was built and transformed. In 1900, a photograph records a young Hopi woman on her wedding day. The frame reveals rituals that brought families and clans together in the villages of the Arizona Plateau. Textiles and shell and turquoise ornaments speak of crafts passed down. The hairstyle and the pieces offered announce entry into adult life and uphold the continuity of the people. Until 1858, the area that would become Denver, Colorado, had few people and no reason to build railways. The turning point came with the discovery of gold, which sparked a rush to the mountains. To move people and cargo, railroads arrived quickly and stitched the economy together, speeding the birth of modern Colorado. On October 17, 1906, the Deadwood Theater was packed. The audience, mostly well-paid miners, bought tickets without bargaining and filled every seat. Actor Charles Chapin noted that every scene drew applause. That night showed more than a performance. The town displayed a full pocket and a united voice. And it left one question hanging: what would come next? In the 1886 photograph, Julie Nelson appears aligned with the social codes of the late 19th century. Attire, hairstyle, and posture communicate the pursuit of respectability amid urbanization and industrial advance. The direct gaze and calculated pose suggest control and self-awareness before the camera, a mirror of new forms of visibility and transformation and of status. For nearly 2 centuries, the Texas Rangers roamed the state as border guards and the armed arm of the government. They began as small patrols, faced land disputes, tribal conflicts, and bandits, and shaped law in a changing territory. Their work left marks, controversies, and legends that still echo across Texas today. In 1889, at the Moulin Rouge in Montmartre, the dance hall performer became a key figure of Parisian nightlife. She combined can-can, burlesque humor, and toasts, leading the audience. Layered skirts, corsets, and high stockings came to life under gaslight. For tourists and locals alike, the cabaret became a showcase of urban modernity. In 1895, George A. Addison paints Amy and Carrie Kiowa. On the namesake island off South Carolina, two figures occupy the scene. In the post-Reconstruction era, when the barrier islands combined fishing and cotton, clothing, postures, and objects reveal routines guided by tides and coastal exchanges, in a record that brings matter, labor, and landscape closer. In the 1880s, it was the young Comanche women who kept life in motion. They prepared food, set up and moved camps, worked leather, and brokered exchanges, sustaining mobile networks tied to buffalo hunting and trade. By teaching languages, songs, and rituals, they wove kinship and alliances, preserving traditions in a time of change on the plains. In July 1878, the outlaw Sam Bass arrived in Round Rock with his gang and targeted the bank. The job was set for July 19th, but informants alerted the authorities. Texas Rangers and police took the street. The gunfire started before the heist. Bass and two partners fell. Another escaped wounded. Reports mention Jeff Smith, 17 years old, witness of the day. For generations, these trees survived droughts, plagues, landslides, windstorms, and floods unharmed. What wounded them came from our own hands: recklessness. It was the warning of John Muir, a pioneer of conservation in the United States, reminding that nature endures much but cannot overcome human carelessness. And we pay the price. Teddy Blue Abbott arrived in Miles City when the town set the pace for cattle across the northern Great Plains. He said the rule was simple. When the cowboys' money ran out in the saloons and auctions, no one stayed. The money moved fast on payday. You saddled your horse, took the trail back to the ranch, and waited for the next season.